The war dog trusted no one, until his former soldier came back into his life. He was just a shadow of the hero he used to be. And the dog didn't even remember his name. But when a single touch brought the past crashing back, what would you have done? Walk away, or fight for a love that war tried to erase? Would you believe in second chances if they came with a wagging tail and haunted eyes? The wind swept gently through the pines of Bitterroot Valley, Montana, carrying with it the earthy scent of early autumn and the distant hush of falling leaves. Beneath a pale gray sky, streaked with soft amber light, Logan Hayes stepped out of his rusty old pickup truck, the door creaking open like a tired sigh. His boots crunched on gravel as he approached the cabin, a weathered structure tucked against the edge of the forest, framed by mountains that looked older than time itself. Logan was 39, but carried himself like a man 10 years older. His eyes were a stormy blue, deep-set and shadowed, like they'd spent too long staring at things most people couldn't bear to imagine. His dark hair, beginning to gray at the temples, was cropped short in military fashion, and his frame, though broad and strong, had a slight stiffness to it, the lingering remnants of both injury and memory. There was a scar above his right eyebrow, thin and pale, a souvenir from Kandahar, and though his body had healed, his soul hadn't. 2 years out of the army, and Logan still moved like a man unsure of solid ground. He hadn't meant to come back to Montana, but when the nights grew too long and the silence too loud in the city, the pull of old forests and colder air brought him here, to a house left to him by an uncle he barely knew, surrounded by trees that didn't ask questions. He hadn't spoken to anyone in the nearby town of Darby except for the grocer and his VA-appointed therapist, Dr. Morin, who insisted over and over again that isolation would only deepen the wounds he refused to name. It was she who'd mentioned the idea. Some veterans do well with animals, she said. Sometimes it's not about healing alone. It's about remembering how to love something that doesn't speak. Which is why, this morning, Logan found himself driving past the town line, gravel crunching under his tires, heading toward a modest shelter tucked between the hills, Bitterroot Rescue and Rehab, painted in faded green letters on a slanted wooden sign. The building itself was little more than a converted barn with a chain-link fence running around the back and a thin trail of smoke curling from its chimney. He didn't expect anything. He told himself this was just an obligation to the doctor. But part of him, the quiet part, the part still dreaming in desert heat, hoped for something he couldn't name. Inside, the shelter was clean but unpolished. The scent of bleach hung in the air, trying in vain to cover the dampness of hay and fur. A petite woman in her 50s appeared from a side room. She wore a maroon cardigan over jeans and had graying red hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Her name tag read Nancy. "Looking to adopt?" she asked kindly, her voice tired but warm. Her eyes flicked to Logan's Army-issued jacket, but she said nothing more about it. "Maybe," Logan replied, his voice low, rough. "Just looking." Nancy gestured for him to follow her down a narrow hallway lined with kennels. Dogs barked, yipped, some wagged tails, others merely stared, broken by whatever history brought them here. Logan's eyes passed over each one, but nothing stirred in him. Not until Nancy paused at the far end, at a corner cage partly in shadow. "We got a special one back here," she said gently. "Came in 2 weeks ago, German Shepherd, big boy, quiet, doesn't interact much." Something in Logan's chest pulled taut. As they approached the cage, he saw him. The dog lay with his back to the door, his coat thick with patches of black and tan. His ears were half back, tail still. The name on the intake tag read Shadow, and Logan's knees nearly gave out. "Shadow," he whispered, barely audible. The dog turned his head. Shadow's eyes, dark brown, cautious, met Logan's, and for a moment there was nothing. No flicker of recognition, no wag of the tail, just silence. "That's him," Logan said, stunned. "That's my dog." Nancy blinked. "Yours?" "From overseas, Afghanistan. He was assigned to me. We worked together for 2 years. He saved my life more times than I can count." Nancy opened the cage carefully. "We didn't know. He had no military papers, picked up wandering near the highway." Shadow didn't move. His body remained stiff, distant, as if Logan were just another stranger. But Logan knelt down, arms on his knees. "Hey, boy," he said softly, his voice cracking. "It's me." Shadow looked but didn't come closer. "It's okay," Nancy said. "He's been through a lot. It takes time." But Logan wasn't listening anymore. He was back there, in sand, in noise, in fire. And he remembered the way Shadow used to nudge his leg at night, the way he'd stand between Logan and danger without hesitation. That dog had once trusted him with his life. "I want to take him home," Logan said. "Even if he doesn't remember me, he will." Outside the shelter, as Logan opened the passenger door of his truck, Shadow hesitated. He looked back once at Nancy, then up at Logan, and with slow, reluctant steps, he climbed in. Later that afternoon, as the wind picked up and clouds gathered low over the mountains, Logan parked in front of his cabin. He had prepared a spot, soft bedding by the fire, water, a fresh bowl of food. But Shadow didn't go to any of it. He just sat near the front door, unmoving, eyes scanning the room as if waiting for a threat that never came. Across the fence, a small blue sedan pulled into the neighboring driveway. Logan watched through the window as a woman stepped out. Tall, with shoulder-length blonde hair tied in a loose braid, wearing jeans and a forest green flannel shirt. Her name was Emma Carter, a woman in her mid-30s who had recently moved from Boise with her young son. She had kind eyes, a quiet confidence in her step, and a tiredness in her shoulders that suggested she'd seen life's harder days. Behind her, a boy no older than 6 came bounding out of the car, clutching a stuffed fox. His name was Caleb. Freckled cheeks, shaggy brown hair, and an irrepressible energy that turned every puddle into a playground. As they unloaded boxes, Caleb spotted Shadow through the fence. "Mom," he called out, "there's a big dog over there." Emma looked up, saw Logan at the window, and waved politely. Logan gave a small nod. It was the first time in months he'd interacted with another human who wasn't a therapist or cashier. That evening, as the wind howled through the trees and fire crackled inside, Shadow remained silent, distant, lying near the door. Logan watched him, heart heavy but filled with a strange hope. The dog didn't remember him, but Logan remembered everything, and that would be enough, for now. The first morning with Shadow was quiet, too quiet. Outside, the Montana wind danced through tall lodgepole pines, rustling their needles in a steady rhythm. The sun was slow to rise over the Bitterroot Mountains, and pale light poured in through the cabin's windows, revealing dust motes suspended in still air. Logan Hayes sat in a chair near the fireplace, a mug of black coffee cooling in his calloused hands. Across the room, Shadow lay unmoving, his back to the room, ears only slightly tilted in acknowledgement of the new day. The fire crackled softly, but the warmth between man and dog remained absent. Shadow was not aggressive, just unreachable. He didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't run. But he didn't come close either. It was as if Logan were invisible, or worse, irrelevant. The ache in Logan's chest was deep and familiar, like an old wound pulled open again. He remembered the dog who used to curl up beside his cot in the desert alert, even in sleep. The dog who once lunged between him and a landmine. That Shadow had vanished, replaced by this silent creature with guarded eyes and a rigid posture. Still, Logan couldn't give up, not now, not ever. He spent the morning preparing the cabin for their shared life. He moved the dog bed closer to the hearth, placed a bowl of fresh water beside it, and scattered a few toys new and unused nearby. A rubber bone, a squeaky fox, and a tennis ball that still carried the scent of factory rubber. Shadow did not acknowledge any of it. At noon, Logan stepped outside to chop firewood. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine resin and damp soil. The familiar rhythm of axe meeting wood grounded him. Nearby, Shadow sat in the doorway, unmoving eyes following the swing of the axe but offering no other reaction. Across the yard, a voice called out, small and cheerful. "Hi, Mr. Logan." Logan turned. Caleb Carter stood at the wooden fence that divided their properties, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his curly brown hair poking out from under a knit beanie shaped like a bear's face. In his arms, he clutched something furry and green. "I brought something for your dog," he said proudly. Logan blinked, straightened, and walked toward the fence. "You did?" Caleb nodded, extending the object through a gap in the slats. It was a stuffed alligator, its seams worn, eyes slightly crooked, clearly well loved. "His name's Tuffy. I've had him since I was little, but I think your dog needs him more." Logan was momentarily speechless. "That's very kind of you." "I think he's sad," Caleb said, glancing toward the open cabin door. "Like my mom used to be after Daddy died. Maybe Tuffy will help." Logan's gaze softened. "Thanks, Caleb. I'll give it to him." Caleb beamed and waved before running back toward his house, his boots kicking up little puffs of dust. Inside, Logan placed Tuffy gently near Shadow's bed. The German Shepherd lifted his head slightly, sniffed the air, then turned his head away. Still, Logan didn't remove the toy. He left it there, a small offering of peace from one soul to another. That night, Logan sat by the fire reading an old paperback with a creased spine. Shadow remained curled near the door, unmoving. The distance between them was just 10 feet, but emotionally it could have been a battlefield apart. As the flames danced, Logan spoke softly, mostly to himself. "You remember Kandahar? You were the only reason I ever made it back. They said you saved 6 lives before the last blast took your hearing. I didn't want to leave you behind. They didn't give me a choice." Shadow did not stir. "I don't know what they did to you after, but I swear, I'm here now, and I'm staying." Outside, snow began to fall light and slow, dusting the pines in shimmering white. In the middle of the night, Logan awoke to the soft sound of claws on the wooden floor. He held his breath. Shadow had left his post by the door and was standing just outside Logan's bedroom, silent, unmoving. His ears twitched, and for a moment his gaze met Logan's in the dim light. Then he turned, lay down near the threshold, and closed his eyes. It was the smallest shift, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Logan found Shadow sitting near the hearth. The stuffed alligator lay between his front paws. He wasn't chewing it or tossing it around, just resting with it. Logan smiled and poured fresh water into the bowl. At lunchtime, Emma Carter dropped by. She wore a wool coat with a faded sunflower pin on the collar. Her blonde braid hung over her shoulder, and her eyes, though tired, held quiet warmth. "I hope Caleb didn't bother you yesterday," she said apologetically. "He didn't," Logan replied. "Actually, he helped." Emma smiled. "He's been through a lot. That toy Tuffy was his companion after his father passed. Letting it go meant something." "He said he thought Shadow looked sad," Logan added. Emma nodded. "Kids can see things we miss." She glanced at the dog, who was now lying beside the fireplace, eyes alert but relaxed. "He's beautiful," she said softly. "What's his name?" Shadow Logan replied. "He's an old friend." Emma didn't press for more, but her expression said she understood. As she turned to go, she paused at the door. "If you ever need anything, or someone to talk to, we're just next door." Logan gave a small nod. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." After she left, Logan sat on the floor near Shadow, not close enough to intrude, but near enough to be felt. He didn't speak, didn't gesture. He just sat. Shadow didn't move, but his breathing slowed and his eyes remained open, not anxious, just watchful. That night, as Logan prepared for bed, he left the door open again. This time, when the fire dimmed to embers, Shadow rose and entered the room, settling himself just beside the bed. Logan turned off the light. Heart quiet, but full. Tomorrow they would try again, and maybe the day after that, they'd try a little more. The wind had turned sharper by the time October settled fully into Bitterroot Valley. Mornings came with a white sheen of frost on the grass, and the pines exhaled their scent like a slow, ancient breath. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled steadily, a small defiance against the creeping chill outside. Shadow lay on his side near the hearth-head on his paws, eyes open but distant. The stuffed alligator Tuffy remained close now, pressed against his chest like a forgotten relic from another life. He didn't chew it or toss it or even seem to acknowledge it most days. But Logan had noticed that Shadow never let it stray far. Logan stood at the kitchen counter, preparing a bowl of food. He'd switched brands. This one had venison and brown rice. Something Dr. Moran once said could ease anxiety in dogs with trauma. He added a splash of warm chicken broth and placed it gently near Shadow's bed. The German Shepherd didn't move. Logan crouched not too close, keeping his voice low and steady. "I added your favorite," he said, trying a note of lightness. "Smells like something you'd have fought me for in the barracks." Still nothing. He stood aside and stepped back. As always, Shadow only moved toward the food when Logan left the room. But even then it was with cautious, almost surgical movements, like each bite was a risk. That evening, as shadows gathered behind the mountains, Logan sat in the armchair near the fire with a journal open on his lap. He stared at the blank page, then turned to Shadow. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said, "but I need to talk to someone. And I think you used to listen better than most." He began slowly, words stumbling at first, then finding their rhythm. "Remember Kabul? You nearly broke your own ribs trying to drag me behind that wall. They told me later you had shards of metal in your leg for weeks. I never got to say thank you." Shadow's ears twitched slightly. Logan leaned forward, elbows on knees. "And that Christmas Eve when the guys were all back home with their families. You lay on my feet the whole night, kept me warm, kept me sane." The fire popped, sending a small burst of ember light dancing across the room. Logan stared into the flame. "They gave me a medal for coming back. You got sent to a shelter." There was no response. Just the quiet and Shadow's slow, even breathing. Across the yard, the Carter house glowed from within. Through the kitchen window, Emma Carter wiped her hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. Her brow was furrowed, not in anger, but in thought. Her long braid was now undone, falling loosely over her shoulders, and her eyes, usually warm, held a flicker of concern. "Caleb," she called, "did you go over to Mr. Logan's again?" The boy peeked around the hallway holding a toy airplane. "Just to the fence." I gave Shadow a biscuit. Emma walked over and knelt to his level. "I've told you, sweetheart, Mr. Logan needs space. We don't know him well." "But he's nice," Caleb said quickly. "He's just sad, like you were. And Shadow needs a friend." Emma softened, but the worry in her heart remained. She hadn't had a proper conversation with Logan since moving in. She knew he was ex-military. She also knew silence like his often came with ghosts. The next day, she baked a small tray of cinnamon muffins, Caleb's favorite recipe, and walked across the yard just as the sun broke through the morning fog. Her boots crunched against frost-bitten grass. Shadow, from his usual spot near the window, lifted his head, but didn't move. Logan opened the door in a flannel shirt and jeans, sleeves rolled, revealing the faded ink of a military tattoo on his forearm. His eyes blinked in the sun. "Hi, Emma," said, holding out the muffins like a peace offering. "We thought you could use something warm." Logan looked at the tray, then at her. "Thanks," he said, his voice low, guarded but not unfriendly. Emma hesitated, then added, "Caleb talks about you. And Shadow. A lot." Logan half smiled. "He's a good kid. I just wanted to be sure. I mean, he's drawn to you. And I know that's not always easy." Logan stepped aside. "You want to come in?" She looked surprised but nodded. Inside, the cabin smelled of firewood leather and something faintly herbal, perhaps the tea cooling on the counter. Emma took in the space. Sparse but warm. A man's refuge. She spotted Shadow curled in the corner, watching her with cautious eyes. "He doesn't bite," Logan said. "But he doesn't come close either." Emma lowered her voice. "He's scared." Logan nodded. "Like me." They sat at the table, and for a few long moments neither spoke. Then Emma said, "My husband died 5 years ago. Car accident. It broke me. I couldn't smile for Caleb for almost a year." Logan looked at her, silent but intent. "Everyone told me to move on, but no one explained how, so I started small. Baking muffins, planting flowers, picking up stuffed animals off the floor. One kindness at a time." Logan swallowed. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "You already did," Emma said, glancing at Shadow. "You took him home." That night, as the firelight flickered low, Logan tried something new. He left his chair and lay down on the floor near Shadow, not touching, not coaxing. Just being. He spoke again in the darkness. "There was a time you didn't let me sleep without your paw against my side. You trusted me with your life. I don't need that now. I just want you to know. I'm here." Shadow didn't move, but he didn't look away either. And when Logan got up to go to bed, he noticed the smallest thing Shadow had inched closer to where he'd been lying. It wasn't a reunion, but it was a sign. The temperature had dropped noticeably overnight. Morning sunlight fell gently through bare branches filtered by thin clouds drifting lazily over the Bitterroot Mountains. A crispness clung to the air, the kind that hinted at snow without fully committing to it. Logan stood on the front porch of his cabin, a mug of coffee in hand, staring out over the misty yard. Shadow lay by the door, as always, quiet, observant, unmoving. For days now, Logan had shared his stories softly at first, then with more openness. He spoke not just of battlefields and missions, but of memories, late-night card games, songs hummed under desert stars, and the cold fear of waiting for a blast that never came. Shadow had remained largely impassive, but Logan noticed the subtle shifts, his ears twitching, the way his gaze lingered longer, the barely visible tension in his frame when familiar names were spoken. Today, Logan wanted to try something new, something old. He walked back inside and opened the wooden chest at the foot of his bed. The hinges groaned as the lid lifted, revealing neatly folded fabric medals in velvet boxes and a photograph of him and Shadow years ago, both younger, stronger, smiling in a way that seemed distant now. Beneath it all was the jacket, his field-issued combat coat weathered, faded, frayed at the cuffs. But it still held the faintest trace of sand and sweat and something deeper connection. Logan brought it into the living room and laid it gently beside Shadow. At first, the German Shepherd didn't react, but then his nostrils flared. Slowly, Shadow turned his head and sniffed. His body stiffened. He sniffed again, more intently this time, and then rested his head on the jacket. His eyes, dark and unreadable, blinked once, twice, then held steady. Logan watched from a distance, heart pounding. "I thought you'd remember," he murmured, "even if just the scent." Shadow didn't wag his tail. He didn't move toward Logan, but he didn't look away either. That afternoon, Logan tried again. He reached for an old tennis ball, faded, cracked, and patched with duct tape. It had been Shadow's favorite during downtime overseas. Back then, the dog would chase it tirelessly across desert training yards, always returning with pride and energy. Logan stood in the backyard and gently tossed the ball a few feet across the frost-dusted grass. Shadow followed the arc with his eyes, then looked back at Logan unmoved. The ball rolled to a stop near a patch of fallen leaves. "It's okay," Logan said softly. "You don't have to chase it. Just remember." Shadow blinked slowly, then turned away. Logan picked up the ball and held it tight. He wasn't disappointed, just patient. Healing wasn't a command. It was a whisper that had to be earned. Later that week, as Logan chopped kindling near the shed, he heard the crunch of footsteps in the frost. He turned to see Caleb Carter bundled in a puffy orange coat, his small face peeking out from under a wool hat with floppy moose antlers. "Hi, Mr. Logan," he chirped. In his mittened hands was a bright blue envelope with stickers of pumpkins and stars. Logan set down the axe and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Hey, Caleb, what have you got there?" "It's an invitation," the boy declared. "We're having a fall festival at school this Saturday. There'll be costumes and pie and a hay maze. I want you and Shadow to come." He held out the envelope like a sacred scroll. Logan hesitated before taking it. "Thanks, buddy. That's very thoughtful. My mom said it's okay if you don't like crowds," Caleb added quickly as if to make it easier. "But it'd be cool. Shadow might even win the costume contest." Logan chuckled a rare quiet sound. "I don't think Shadow's much for dressing up," Caleb grinned. "He doesn't have to. He already looks like a superhero." As the boy waved and skipped back to his yard, Logan stood in place, envelope in hand. His eyes dropped to the blue paper. There was a hand-drawn bat in the corner, and in messy handwriting it read, "To Mr. Logan and Shadow, please come." He didn't know why it struck him so hard. Maybe it was the purity of the gesture, the unquestioning welcome. Maybe it was the way Caleb saw through all the rough edges and silence, and found something worth inviting. That night, Logan sat by the fire with the jacket beside him and the tennis ball in his hand. Shadow lay nearby, eyes half closed but watching. Logan didn't speak. He didn't ask anything. He just sat and let the warmth surround them both. The next morning, as mist rolled off the trees and frost sparkled on the porch rails, Logan placed the jacket beside Shadow once again. This time, the dog rested his muzzle directly on it without hesitation. There was something different in his posture, a subtle loosening, a kind of surrender to memory. Logan smiled and went to make coffee. The sky over Bitterroot Valley turned slate gray by late afternoon, heavy with the promise of a storm. A moody wind swept through the trees, making the tall pines whisper secrets to one another in the language only mountains could understand. The temperature dropped quickly as dusk fell, bringing with it a stillness that felt thick enough to hold memories. Logan Hayes stood near the cabin window, his reflection faint in the glass. Outside, the clouds hung low like bruises, and the air pulsed with the kind of quiet that always came before the sky broke open. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked, but did not cheer. It merely glowed steadily, softly, as if refusing to intrude upon the silence. Behind him, Shadow lay on the rug by the hearth, his breathing slow, his gaze fixed on nothing. The jacket still rested beside him. Though Logan had seen the dog sniff it every day for nearly a week now, Shadow hadn't once moved to retrieve it, chew it, or carry it around. He only lay with it close like a relic from a past life that hurt too much to remember but couldn't be let go. Logan turned from the window and sat on the floor across from him. The room dimmed with the coming storm, and the walls of the cabin seemed to close in with old stories waiting to be told. You ever notice how storms always seem louder in the dark? Logan asked, not expecting a reply. I used to count between the flash and the boom like that'd make it less violent. A sudden gust of wind hit the side of the cabin. The fire hissed as it sucked air into its lungs. Logan closed his eyes. The storm was no longer outside. It had returned to his chest. He could feel the familiar weight pressing down, the same heaviness that had wrapped around him the night he lost 2 men in Kandahar, the same guilt that had clung to him when they pulled Shadow from a medevac chopper and said he was too broken for service. Logan had promised he would find Shadow again. It had taken years, but here they were, and Shadow didn't even know him. Outside, rain finally broke loose in hard, slanted sheets rattling the tin roof. Lightning flashed, carving the sky like a jagged scar. Then came a shift so soft, Logan almost missed it. Shadow stood slowly, his body tense but calm. He took 3 cautious steps, then sat down beside Logan. Not touching, not seeking, just present. Logan didn't move, didn't breathe. He looked sideways, saw the quiet strength in Shadow's profile, ears still alert, eyes focused forward. The dog's chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm with the wind. It was the first time Shadow had come to him of his own accord. No words, no wagging tail, just a silent pact. Logan lowered his head, letting the moment sit. "You're here," he whispered. "That's enough." The next morning was all silver mist and dripping branches. A soft fog clung to the treetops like gauze, and dew soaked the porch railing. Logan stepped outside to breathe in the smell of wet earth and pine. Shadow followed, not closely, but willingly. He sat at the edge of the porch and stared into the woods as if listening to stories the fog was telling. Later that day, Emma Carter appeared at the fence. Her blonde hair was tucked beneath a gray knit cap, her coat zipped to her chin. She held a thermos in one hand and a folded paper bag in the other. "I thought you might be running low on firewood," she called. Logan looked up from the chopping block, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm good, but thanks." Emma hesitated, then smiled. "Can I trade you a cup of cider for a few minutes of adult conversation?" Logan nodded and gestured to the porch. They sat on opposite ends of the wooden steps. The cider was warm-spiced and fragrant. Logan sipped slowly, more for the company than the flavor. "Caleb said the storm kept him up," Emma said after a pause. "He wanted to make sure Shadow was okay." Logan glanced toward the cabin. Shadow was asleep inside, curled near the cold hearth. "He was better than I was," Logan murmured. Emma studied Logan's face. The lines around his eyes, the hollowness behind them, the way his shoulders were always slightly tensed. "I know that look," she said quietly. Logan raised an eyebrow. "What look?" "The one that says, 'I survived the fire, but I'm still choking on the smoke.'" Logan gave a short breath of amusement. "Is that a teacher's observation?" Emma smiled softly. "It's a widow's." Logan turned to her, sensing the gravity beneath her words. "My husband, Jordan," she continued, her voice even, was driving home from a shift at the paper mill. "Black ice on Route 93. He didn't make the turn." Logan said nothing. He knew better than to offer sympathy when silence could carry more meaning. "Caleb was too," she went on. "Didn't really understand it. Still asks if his dad is watching from the clouds." "You ever tell him no?" Logan asked. Emma shook her head. "Not once." The wind stirred the trees gently. A raven called from somewhere deeper in the forest. "You're not what I expected when we moved in," she said after a pause. Logan smirked faintly. "I'm not what I expected either." Emma stood and brushed her coat off. "Just know this, whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." She handed him the folded bag. "Caleb made cookies. Said they're for Shadow, but Mr. Logan can have one too." Logan smiled. Tell him thanks." As she turned to leave, Shadow appeared at the door. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply stood beside Logan, tall and still watching Emma with calm eyes. Emma stopped. "He's beautiful. He's broken," Logan said quietly. Emma turned back, eyes soft. "So are we all." That night, as darkness returned and the wind picked up again, Logan left the door open a crack. Shadow came in and lay beside the bed, closer now, head turned toward Logan's breathing. There was still no wagging, no licking, no grand moment of reunion. But Logan didn't need grand. He only needed real. The air was unusually still that morning, heavy with a kind of quiet that only came after long days of rain. The clouds had parted slightly above the Bitterroot Mountains, letting shafts of weak golden light cut through the valley. The forest glistened, drenched and subdued, its pine branches dripping in rhythm. The world felt like it was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, Logan Hayes sat at the edge of his bed, turning something over in his hands. It was small, dull silver with scratches across its side and a frayed leather strap. A military whistle, standard issue, used years ago in Afghanistan. Back then, its sharp sound had been a signal move halt return guard. Shadow had learned it better than any soldier. It had been their language in chaos. Logan hadn't used it in years. But today, something in the stillness told him it was time. He walked into the yard with the whistle hanging from his neck. Shadow followed slowly, his steps cautious but no longer fearful. His coat shimmered in the pale, light black and tan fur damp from the morning dew. His body was lean, aging, but still powerful. There was something deeper in his eyes now, a quiet awareness that hadn't been there before. Logan turned to face him. "We used to train right here, didn't we?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the worn tennis ball, the same one from weeks ago. He held it up but didn't throw it. Instead, he took a breath and blew 2 short, sharp blasts on the whistle. The sound pierced the quiet. Shadow froze. His ears twitched. His tail didn't wag, but his head turned sharply toward Logan. His muscles tensed. For a heartbeat, the air itself seemed to lean forward, waiting. "Sit," Logan said calmly, using the old tone, firm, familiar. Shadow hesitated, visibly unsure. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he lowered himself to the ground and sat. Logan's mouth parted slightly. His chest tightened. Shadow looked up at him. Not confused, not frightened, just steady, alert. The past had cracked open. Logan's eyes stung. He blinked hard, swallowed the wave of emotion, and knelt slowly. "Good boy," he whispered. "You remember." Behind the fence, small hands clapped. "Mr. Logan!" "He did it!" came the excited voice of Caleb. Logan turned to see the little boy bouncing up and down, his cheeks flushed with delight. He wore his school backpack and had a paper crown slightly askew on his head. "I saw everything," Caleb beamed. "Shadow's a real hero dog." Logan couldn't help it. He laughed. Not just a quiet chuckle, but a full, unguarded laugh, rough with rust and surprise. It was the first time laughter had come from him without effort in years. It felt strange on his face, like rediscovering a lost part of himself. Caleb giggled too. "Can he do it again?" Logan smiled. "Let's find out." He turned back to Shadow, blew the whistle once, then tossed the ball gently across the yard. Shadow watched it roll through the grass, ears perked, but didn't chase it right away. He looked back at Logan, then back at the ball as if searching for meaning in the action. Slowly, he stood, trotted toward the ball, sniffed it, and after a moment, picked it up in his jaws. He walked back and dropped it at Logan's feet. Not fast, not joyful, but purposeful. Logan knelt again and touched the dog's shoulder tentatively, gently. Shadow didn't flinch. For the first time, he leaned slightly into the contact. That afternoon, the cabin was filled with something new. Not celebration, not closure, but momentum. The fire was lit not just for warmth, but for company. Logan sat on the floor while Shadow lay beside him, resting his chin on Logan's leg. Later, Logan walked across the yard to the Carter house. Emma was raking fallen leaves into neat piles while Caleb darted between them, pretending to be a dragon. Emma wore a navy fleece and old jeans dusted with leaf bits, her blonde hair in a low bun. "You're early," she said, surprised. Logan raised a hand. "Thought I'd return the tray from last week. Also, Shadow responded to a command this morning. The whistle." Emma's eyes widened. "That's big, isn't it?" He nodded. "He sat when I asked, then brought the ball back." She smiled. "Looks like things are changing." Logan looked toward the trees, then back at her. "I think we both are." That night, Logan placed the whistle gently on the nightstand. Shadow curled beside the bed without hesitation now. When Logan turned off the light, he didn't say anything. He just reached down and let his fingers rest lightly in Shadow's fur. A silent thank you, and a vow to keep going. The morning sun spilled like honey across the hills of Bitterroot Valley, catching in the dew and turning the golden grass into a sea of tiny flickering stars. There was warmth in the breeze now, the kind that whispered the promise of change without needing to shout it. Logan Hayes stood at the edge of the tree line, his breath steady, his heart unexpectedly light. Beside him, Shadow sat poised and alert, tail swaying slightly, not stiff, not anxious. There was something younger in his stance today, something closer to the dog he used to be. He looked up at Logan, not with fear, not even with obedience, but with something softer. Trust. Logan reached down and gently clipped the old leash to Shadow's collar. Not out of necessity, but out of ritual. "Let's go," he said. And together they headed up the narrow path that led through the woods toward a hill that once meant everything. The trail wound through tall pines and wild fern, their branches shaking off the last of the morning mist. Birds chirped above, and the distant rustle of a deer somewhere deeper in the forest made Shadow's ears twitch, but he remained close, his steps nearly in sync with Logan's own. They reached the top just as the sun cleared the ridgeline. The hill wasn't particularly tall, but from there the whole valley stretched below miles of forest, a silver ribbon of river, and the faint outline of Darby's rooftops in the far distance. It was the same hill where Logan had trained with Shadow during their pre-deployment leave. Back then they had run drills, practiced commands, and sometimes just sat in silence watching clouds change shape like thoughts too large to hold. Logan unclipped the leash and held up the old tennis ball. "You remember this place?" he asked, voice quiet but steady. Shadow didn't need words. His body answered first. He stepped forward, eyes fixed on the ball muscles coiled. Logan smiled and tossed it. The ball arced high into the golden air, and Shadow ran, not hesitantly, not stiffly. He bounded like he was young again, paws skimming the ground, ears flying back with speed. He chased the ball down the slope, caught it mid-bounce, turned and galloped back, tail wagging in a slow, confident rhythm. Logan dropped to a crouch as the German Shepherd charged up the last stretch and placed the ball firmly at his boots. "Good boy, Logan," said his voice breaking into a grin. "Real good." Shadow barked once sharp and joyful, and Logan laughed deep and unrestrained. It felt like a lifetime had cracked open. In that single bark, there was history, loyalty, love. In that single gaze, there was reunion. He threw the ball again. Shadow gave chase, slipping once in the wet grass, but recovering with ease. They played like that for a long time. Logan's voice shouting encouragement. Shadow's legs flying. The hill became sacred ground again. Not for war, not for training, but for healing. Half an hour later, as they sat in the shade of a spruce tree, Logan rubbed behind Shadow's ears, and the dog leaned into the touch without flinching. The quiet between them now was not empty, but full. From behind the sound of laughter rose up the trail. Logan turned to see Emma Carter and Caleb making their way through the trees, a small picnic basket swinging from Emma's arm. Caleb ran ahead, waving one arm with delight, the other clutching a folded blanket. "I told Mom you'd be here," he shouted. "We brought muffins." Emma emerged from the brush moments later wearing a denim jacket over a floral top, her cheeks flushed with the walk eyes bright despite the climb. Her smile was soft, genuine. "We didn't want to interrupt," she said, setting the basket down. But Caleb insisted. "We saw you playing," Caleb added. "Shadow's super fast." Logan glanced at Emma, then at Shadow, who was now standing beside Caleb, gently sniffing the boy's hand. "I think he's coming back," Logan said quietly. Emma looked at him. "I think you are." There was a long pause, but it wasn't awkward. It was a space filled with understanding between two people who had lost more than most and somehow found comfort not just in their own stories but in witnessing the healing of another. Caleb tugged on Logan's sleeve. "Will you throw the ball again, Mr. Logan?" Logan reached for it, tossed it gently, and Shadow ran again just as eager. As the dog returned and dropped it, Caleb clapped. "He's smiling." Logan looked at Shadow, who was panting softly, tongue-out eyes, bright tail wagging. If dogs could smile, Shadow was beaming. Emma handed Logan a muffin wrapped in parchment paper. "Pumpkin spice." "Don't judge," Logan grinned. "Wouldn't dare." He took a bite. It was warm, sweet, and full of the kind of comfort that didn't ask questions. As the wind rustled the grass and the sky stretched wider overhead, Logan leaned back on his hands, eyes lifted toward the clouds. Shadow lay beside him. Caleb played with sticks nearby. Emma sat cross-legged, sipping from a thermos. And for the first time in years, Logan wasn't thinking about the past. He wasn't worrying about the future. He was simply here, and here was enough. The first blush of dawn crept gently over the Bitterroot Lake, painting the still water in strokes of lavender and rose. A thin mist rose like breath from the surface, veiling the far shore in a gauze of quiet mystery. The trees lining the bank had begun their autumn shift, burnt orange, golden yellow, deep crimson, standing proudly like guards to a sacred place. Logan Hayes stood at the edge of the trail, his flannel shirt unbuttoned over a gray thermal hands deep in his pockets. He watched as Caleb darted ahead, his small boots kicking up leaves, arms spread like airplane wings. The boy's laughter, bright and unfiltered, rose into the crisp morning air. Behind Logan, Emma Carter walked at a relaxed pace, her hand holding a thermos of apple cider, her eyes flickering often to the man beside her. She wore a wool coat, soft green, and a scarf that Caleb had once knitted with mismatched yarn. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few golden strands catching the early sun. Shadow trotted just ahead of them all, his gait relaxed tail moving gently like a flag of peace. The old German shepherd's coat shone in the morning light, and there was youth in the way he moved despite the silver along his snout. Every so often he would glance back as if counting his people. The trail curved toward the lake, and Logan slowed his steps, letting the world settle around them. He carried something small in his coat pocket, something he'd kept for years. Today felt like the right time. They reached a quiet spot by the water, a patch of soft grass with a view that stretched out across the lake like a dream. Caleb dropped to his knees beside Shadow and leaned his head against the dog's shoulder. "I think Shadow likes this place," he murmured sleepily. Logan nodded. "So did I. Used to come here after deployments, just to remember what stillness felt like." Emma sat beside him, her legs tucked beneath her. "You never told me that." "There's a lot I never told anyone," Logan replied softly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered tag, dull metal with a name etched deep, Shadow. Emma looked at it, her eyes widening slightly. This was his ID tag, Logan said, holding it out to Caleb. We wore it together when we were overseas. It meant we were a team. It meant no one got left behind. Caleb sat up, his expression serious. Why are you giving it to me? Logan's voice was steady. Because you reminded me what loyalty looks like. And love. And because family isn't always who you're born to. It's who stays. Caleb held the tag like it was made of gold. Shadow lay down between them, resting his head on his paws, eyes half closed but content. He didn't move when Caleb nestled closer, his small frame curving around the dog's warmth. A peaceful silence fell, broken only by birdsong and the soft lap of water against the shore. The sun climbed higher, casting amber light across the trio, no longer broken pieces but a patchwork beginning to form something whole. Emma's hand brushed against Logan's. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his palm up, fingers rough and worn but steady. She slipped her hand into his. No words. No explanation. Just a quiet yes. Minutes passed. Caleb drifted into sleep, his cheek against Shadow's ribs, the tag still clutched in his small hand. Logan leaned back, staring at the sky. Funny thing about healing, he said, voice low. You don't notice it until one day the silence doesn't hurt. Emma looked at him, her voice warm. And the mornings don't feel so empty. He nodded. I didn't think I could ever be part of something again. Not after everything. But... She squeezed his hand gently. You are. They sat like that until the sun stood high above the lake, until the mist burned off and the wind shifted and the world stirred awake around them. Shadow raised his head once ears perked, sensing something in the air, not threat, not memory, just belonging. He laid back down, exhaled, and closed his eyes. Sometimes healing doesn't come in loud miracles. It comes in quiet mornings, in old dog tags passed from one hand to another, in a child's laughter, and in the warmth of a hand that finally dares to hold yours again. Shadow's return was not just about a dog remembering commands. It was about a broken soul learning to trust again, about the unseen hand of grace guiding two wounded hearts back to each other. Just like Logan, many of us carry invisible scars, memories we don't speak of, and silence that feels too heavy. But God works not only in grand gestures. Sometimes he works through a dog's eyes, through a neighbor's kindness, or through the innocence of a child's belief that love is still possible. In a world that can be loud with pain, the true miracle is when we choose to stay, to forgive, to try again. May this story remind us that no one is ever too far gone, that redemption is possible, that family can be found in the most unexpected places, and above all, that God never forgets the ones who feel forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Don't forget to comment below and write Amen if you believe in second chances and the quiet miracles that God sends our way. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith healing and the unspoken bond between humans and the animals that walk with us. May the Lord bless every person watching this with peace, comfort, and love beyond words.